6:30. So I'm going to welcome everyone to our annual informational meeting. It's nice to see everyone virtually, and I, for one, am relieved to not try to make it down my road in deep mud ruts that are now frozen. So this virtual platform is nice from a driving perspective. So I want to let everyone know that who may be watching this after the fact that I would really encourage everyone to read in your respective town booklets the section from the FNESU report. I had a chance to look through it yesterday and a bit today, and it really is so helpful to provide kind of the context behind the budget. Because if all you see are the numbers on the budget or on your ballot, you may be missing a lot of the really deep context that drives these budgets. And there's really wonderful reports about, you know, some of the challenges that we've gone through COVID this last 2 years, and the ways in which across the board, we've really, the board and the administrators and our building leaders and our amazing teachers, our amazing staff, our bus drivers, everyone has really risen to this tremendous challenge. And so some of that is highlighted in various reports, and each school principal has written a really wonderful kind of accounting of how things are going in their respective buildings. And I think if you don't have children or grandchildren or extended family in the schools, you may not quite kind of be right on the pulse of what's happening in the schools. But it's, you know, as voters, we really want people to understand the important and good work that we're all doing here. And the write-ups really do provide that nice context. So I'm just wanted to make a plug for everyone to pick up their town books and read the sections, the section that pertains to the school and to the SU. So that said, Courtney, I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of highlight and outline how the webinar platform works, so that any participants kind of understand how to ask questions and kind of what the format of the evening will be.
Okay. First, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. This is not a typical Zoom meeting. It is a webinar format, and the webinar format allows for a higher number of participants. Attendees, you do not have to worry about muting yourselves or turning off your cameras. Zoom already does that automatically in a webinar. Also, I just want to mention that the chat function is turned off for this meeting, but we do have a Q&A section. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a button that says Q&A. And during the presentation, if you have a question, feel free to type it into the Q&A. And when we have natural pauses, or even at the end of the meeting, I will read the question out loud, and one of our panelists will answer the question. Once I read the question out loud, everybody will be able to see what the question said. And now I'd like to turn it over to Morgan Daybell, who will present tonight.
Thanks, Courtney. And I'm going to share my screen. And is everybody able to see that?
Yes.
Great. So there are a total of 6 articles that are going to be voted on town meeting day. The first 2 that you see on the screen are 2 that we normally do from the floor, the election of a moderator and the election of a clerk. But because of the COVID protocols similar to last year, these are going to be by ballot on March 1st. Currently, there's nobody who has filed for the moderator position. The person who held it the past year has stepped down from that, both for NMV and for Berkshire Town. So that position is open, and it would accept write-in candidates. Emily Fecto, who's the current clerk for the district, filed and is the only candidate on the ballot for Article 2. Article 3 is to elect 3 school board members. In this case, all three positions have one candidate and is the current incumbent. So 2 seats up in Bakersfield. The extra seat is because the candidate who held it, Jean Marie Clark, had moved out of town and so stepped down midterm. And then 1 candidate in Montgomery. The first in Bakersfield is Erin Paquette, who's on the call. The second is Arlene O'Rourke, who's filling in that last year for Jean Marie Clark, also on the call. And then for Montgomery, it's Mary Niles, who opened up the meeting. The next 3 articles are sort of the money articles. Article 4 is the budget, and so this $18 million figure is the amount of money that the school board is looking for permission to spend from you, the voters. And in the slides coming up, we will go over that in a little bit more detail. Article 5 is related to the money that's left over at the end of the year. So for this budget, the board looked at the amount of money that was not spent as of last June and is asking the voters to put approximately half of that into a capital reserve fund. On the Northern Mountain Valley side, there's no capital reserve fund that would cover any of the buildings. 3 of the original towns brought a little bit of capital reserve money into that marriage a few years ago, but those reserves are fairly small. And when we get to the revenue section, we'll talk a little bit about the reason that the board came to this $605,000 figure, but that is Article 5. Article 6 is on the ballot every year, and that just gives the board of directors the ability to borrow money during the next school year. The district has expenses that start right up on July 1st, the first day of our fiscal year, and we don't really see much money coming in from the state until September, and then tax money coming in from the towns sometimes after that. And so this gives the board that ability, if they need it, to borrow money to get us through those first 3 or 4 months of the year. I guess I can pause there, and if there are any questions on kind of the format of the voting or the balloting for March 1st, we'd be happy to take those.
Right now, we don't have any questions, but I can give it a few seconds.
Okay, and I can push on. So the next 2 slides are the expense budget, and this will track the budget that appears in your town books. The section that's up on your screen now is for the pre-kindergarten program. And one thing that I want to highlight here, and it will become more evident as well on the next slide, is you'll see that in the special education line that the budget is going down to 0 for FY23. And then there's a relatively large increase in the direct instruction for regular education. In pre-K as well as in the elementary budget, which is coming next, this shift from special ed to regular ed, direct instruction, is a function of Act 173, which was a law that was passed a few years ago. And if nothing has changed in the legislature in the next 2 months, will go into effect on July 1st. Act 173, and others can jump on if they can explain it better, but Act 173 is fundamentally changing the way that both we deliver special ed services and also the way that we pay for special ed services. And so I'll talk a little bit about the payment side of it. In the past, if there were special ed expenses, either at the supervisory union level or at the district level, after an initial amount of grant money, the state would basically reimburse us roughly 56 cents on every dollar that we spent. So as we go through the year and we have paraeducators in the local level, or we have special educators at the SU level, we would track those expenses and we would get reimbursed for approximately half of that. Act 173 does away with that funding scheme and instead is going to be sending what's called a census block grant directly to the supervisory union, higher than they had sent in the past. And there will be no money going to the districts. So we will not be tracking any paraeducators as special ed paraeducators as opposed to regular ed paraeducators, because that distinction in large part has been about funding.
Morgan, can I just add one thing here?
Yes.
I think that the funding part that you just described definitely has to do with the special ed portion of it. I think that when we think about the fundamental changes that are coming as a result of Act 173, it's inclusive of all students, because the primary idea behind that is that our schools and systems really need to look at how we support all learners and really look at, you know, your curriculum, look at our professional learning for our teachers, and looking at how we assess student learning and also how we support student learning with all of our students. So it is inclusive of students in the general education setting in the classroom, students that need a little bit of intervention outside of the classroom, all the way up through special education. So it provides some greater flexibility with this shift in the model so that we can more freely support all learners without the constraints that went along with that reimbursement model for special education.
Okay, and now in front of you is the K-12 budget. Again, first is the regular education section. You'll see again a big increase in that direct instruction, which in large part is that move from special education. And then down below in the special education section, you'll see that, or roughly $600,000 line item is going away in FY23. You will also see it's sort of lost in the increases that come with health insurance increasing and salaries increasing, but we have moved a chunk of guidance counselor time out of the general fund budget and into a grant funded budget because there was a grant we're able to use to offset some of that cost. So that has helped to keep some of the increase down a little bit. In terms of professional staff across the district, this budget has two areas where it's increasing. The first is in pre-K in Sheldon, where the board looked at the pre-K offerings for all 4 schools, and there's a significant gap in terms of the hours of service that Sheldon was able to offer, certainly given its larger population. And so we've added both a pre-K teacher and a pre-K paraeducator to that part of the budget, and are kind of working with Christy Martin, the principal there right now, trying to figure out how we can possibly carve out another pre-K classroom in the building. The other increase in terms of professional staff is in Montgomery Elementary, where we have brought the guidance counselor there up from a part-time position to a full-time position, both to keep it more in line with the other schools and also to help address some of the needs in that realm that we're seeing increase over certainly the past 3 years. And I don't know if anyone wants to talk on that specifically before we go on. Okay, so that brings us to this bottom line number here, the $18,210,000. In terms of expenses, that's an increase of only about 2.4%, so a little under 2.5% from FY22, the year that we're in now. I'm going to take you next to the revenue picture, and I tipped some of this earlier on in the presentation. You'll see this $150,000 decrease under other restricted. That's tied to that guidance counselor salary that I said that we were pulling out into a grant. We had always sort of rolled that grant revenue into the general fund, and as the state is locking down its accounting system more and more, we are we're being required to pull that out into a separate fund. So the revenue is going and the expenses are going away. And then in that state revenue, that $304,000 decline is the amount of special ed revenue that in the pre-Act 173 setup we would be able to receive at the district. And now we will be receiving some offsetting revenue at the supervisory union. And then the last line on this page is the use of fund balance. And so this is tied to that Article 5 that, that the board has on the warning. If you look at this, sorry about that, to go back, if you look at this 403,000 figure at the bottom of the FY22 approved column, that was the amount of money that we had left over in the FY20 school year. So June 30th, 2020, we settled our books. We had $403,000 that we hadn't spent. I believe that was largely due to that first year of COVID and not being able to do nearly the level of activity that we wanted to do. By default, that $403,000 goes back to the voters 2 years later. So the FY20 end of year fund balance goes to the FY22 budget as a revenue, which helps to drive down the tax rate. In FY23, we have a much higher fund balance to work with. So at the end of FY21, at the end of last June, we had about $1.2 million left over. That was money that came in, that we earned or that we raised through taxes or that we got through grants, and we weren't able to spend in that same year. So that amount of money by default goes to the FY23 budget. The board is asking to put half of that towards the budget and then take half of that out of the general fund budget and put that into a capital reserve fund, which would be a pot of money that we can use to maintain the upkeep of all 4 of our buildings now. You'll see that revenue increases by about $200,000. Roughly, I would say that is about a penny and a half that it drives down the tax rate, because as that revenue goes up, your spending goes down and the tax rate goes down. So the board is proposing to basically buy down your tax rate by about a penny and a half. The reason they're not putting the whole amount in there is because this is a number that fluctuates pretty widely from year to year. So if we ended 21 with $200,000 instead of the 1.2 million, the amount of money that we would be bringing forward in FY23, we would probably put that full 200,000 in there. And that change from 22 to 23 would be a decline of about 200,000. So that would be driving your tax rate up by a penny and a half. And it's actually would be driving it up because we did a better job of budgeting. So it's a little bit of a strange feedback loop there. So what the board has the ability to do, and you have the ability to bless on town meeting day, is to take some of that money away, both for the purpose of holding it in reserve so that we can replace those boilers when they go or put on a new roof when we need it without having to go to bond, but also to try to smooth some of those fluctuations in the tax rate from year to year. I don't know, Courtney, I'll pause there and see if anybody wants to jump in on a question on there.
Right now, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just saying right now we don't have anything in the Q&A just yet.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, we do have one. Not a question, but kudos for the dual use of the fund balance. Very pleased to see the board set aside a reserve fund.
Perfect. So the slide up now is setting up the projected tax rate for this year. And a caveat, these numbers have changed since they've been published in your town books. I'm sure they will change again before your final rates are set this summer. So please keep that in mind. But to walk you through the formula quickly in this FY23 proposed column, that first number of 18 million is the amount of money the board is asking the voters for authority to spend next year. And that's really the only part of the formula in terms of tax rates that the board or the voters controls. We subtract out of that 843,000 of primarily grant revenue for this district, and we talked a little bit about why that has dropped. And that comes to an education spending amount of $17 million and change. And that's the amount of money that the state eventually will send us if this budget is passed from the ed fund. So residential property tax, non-residential property tax, the lottery, and some of those other streams that go into that fund. That amount is divided by the equalized pupils, which is a kind of weighted count of the students that we've had in the district for the last 2 years. And that gets you to a per pupil ed spending amount of $16,370. And that is the figure that the state uses and that we use later to sort of compare how districts across the state are doing in their spending. And that's basically the amount of ed fund money that we have to draw down for each kid. That is divided by the dollar yield, which is a number that is ultimately set in the legislature. And that gets us to an equalized residential school tax rate. And that is a tax rate for the district as a whole. So that dollar yield of $12,937 is probably going to change. We think that's a pretty accurate number. The ed fund is very healthy this year, so much that we're anticipating about half of it will be repurposed by the legislature for other uses, and then half of it will go to kind of driving up this yield rate, which will drive down taxes. So that residential school tax rate of $1.2654 is about a 10.5 cent drop over the rate from last year. And it's a function of everything up above, but it's primarily driven by the strong dollar yield, which is the strength of the ed fund. When we take that rate, we need to apply it to each of the towns, and each of the towns maintains their own grand list and updates that on a different schedule and uses different metrics to measure that. And so the state comes up with the CLA figure, which is their attempt to make sure that that $1.2654 tax rate really is the same for everyone in every town, whether they're in Alburgh or down in Brattleboro. And so all of the CLAs in our towns are below 100%, which means basically that the amounts on the grand list where your properties are assessed are lower than fair market value. And you'll see in that FY22 to 23 change, the CLAs are dropping in all 4 towns. And that's really a function of the strong real estate market, and properties are selling for more than they're assessed at. If you look at Bakersfield as an example, you'll see that CLA is 88.77. So that would mean that a property assessed at $88,000 in Bakersfield, so they're on the grand list for $88,000, the state really thinks that that property is worth $100,000. And you can kind of follow that same formula through for the other 4 towns. And I think, again, the picture here is that there was a significant drop in the tax rate because of the strong yield. But as was predicted, the strong real estate market is driving down that CLA because assessments in the towns are just not keeping up with the rate and the price that homes have been selling for in the last year. What's not on this page is the non-residential rate. The reason that we don't present it here is that although it's changed by the CLA, nothing in the budget vote will impact that rate. that is set by the state, and it'll be finalized by the legislature in May or June of this year. The most recent numbers that I have seen proposed has that rate down by about 13 cents over last year. So a similar drop to what we're seeing with the yield. I don't know if there are any questions on that.
Morgan, I wonder if you want to go back one slide, and could you go town by town what the anticipated decrease in tax rate is that we can expect?
Sure. So again, before the CLA, it's a 10.5 cent decrease for everyone. For Bakersfield, it would be roughly 4.8 cents down. For Berkshire, it's down a penny, and that's because they were the town that saw the greatest increase in their grand list based on those sales. In Montgomery, it's down about 2 cents, and then in Sheldon, it's down almost 8 cents.
There are no questions, Morgan.
Okay. So this chart, which is in your town book, and it's also on the flyer that went out, is looking at the current year spending, because that's the most recent data we have for all of the districts in the state. And then we have called out the ones in Franklin County, as well as the Franklin County average and the statewide average. And this is, again, to show you that NMV, as it has been in the past, is towards the bottom in terms of that spending per pupil. And again, this is the figure that is calculated before any impact of CLA or the yield. Couple more slides in your book that I won't spend a lot of time on. This first one takes a look at that general fund budget based on where we spend our money. And so you can see that this green band, 95% of what we spend money is on what we call direct regular education. So direct instruction, that biggest chunk is your classroom teachers and those supplies. The next biggest chunk is that roughly quarter that we send out in terms of high school tuition for grades 9 through 12. And then relatively small pieces of the pie after that, special ed coming in at 3%, and then after school, co-curricular and athletics kind of make up the remaining 2% of that pie, looking at it that way. This next slide shows you the same thing, the general fund, but it's based on the types of things we buy. So this half in blue is personnel. So this is what it costs to put people in your buildings, whether they're teachers, paraeducators, principals, custodians, what have you, their salaries and their benefits. The section in red is services, and it's almost the entire other half of the pie. And this is basically what we pay other entities to do for us. So again, that tuition payment to the high schools is the biggest chunk, but there are things like transportation and some of those other services would be food service that the district's contract from the supervisor union or special education service, or the debt payments on the 4 buildings. And then that last piece of the pie, that yellow slice, roughly 3% is the materials or the stuff that we buy. So that's really classroom supplies, and then the utilities, the stuff we need to pay for to heat and to light your buildings. So a relatively tiny chunk of the budget. And if you kind of took tuition out of the picture, because you're not educating those kids in your building, really the lion's share, which I think we see across the state, is that it's in personnel. And then the last slide I have are the polling places and the times for the vote. You can actually vote early now, either by mail or in person. You can check in with your town clerk on the requirements for getting those ballots back to them in time. And then the polling places and the times listed on the slide are when they will be open for in-person voting. And I just want to note that there has been one change since the flyer went out to everyone, and that's in Sheldon. Originally, we were planning on holding the ballot vote at the school, and the Sheldon Select Board, when they decided to move from an in-person meeting to an Australian ballot meeting, they moved the voting from the school to the town office. So that's where those votes will be conducted.
Great. Thank you so much, Morgan.
Sure. So Courtney, I don't know if there are other questions.
Yes, there are two right now in the Q&A, and I just wanted to let anybody know who jumped on a little bit after we had started. If you have a question, you are more than welcome to type it into our Q&A, and that is found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So the first question we have is, are we still letting the staff keep their HSA balance that's left over?
Sure, I can take that one. So the statewide teacher healthcare negotiation, this latest round is basically given teachers the option of having an HSA or an HRA. What an HSA is, for people who don't know, is that we put money into an account that is controlled by the employee, and they can use that to pay certain medical expenses if they choose to. An HRA is a health reimbursement account, and we don't give that money to the employee. We hold that money, and it's basically a promise to pay up to a certain amount of money. So if they have an expense of the doctor, they will submit it, and we will pay it until they have exhausted that money. The HSA money, as soon as we give it to the teachers, that is off of our books and it's out of our control. So we don't ever get any of that money back. If they choose an HSA and it's, say, $2,000 or $2,200 for a family plan, it's theirs to control, and it's theirs to monitor. We don't have any more say on that. For the HRA, if they put that $2,200 and it's in an HRA, if they haven't spent it within a certain amount of time, we basically get that money back into the district. And that's something that's it's an IRS rule. It's nothing that we can control either way.
A follow-up question to that is, how much do we give them?
So Lynn could jump in and correct me on that. And again, this is something that is determined statewide. We don't control that anymore. I believe it is in this current year, it's either $2,200 or $2,400, depending on whether they're a teacher or a paraeducator or other support staff. And then that's double if they're on a family plan. And if I'm not right, I'm close, and I can follow up if you want.
I'm trying to look it up, Morgan. I think you're right, though. Morgan, Courtney, do you want to go on and I'll look for that answer and then we can circle back to it?
So we have one more. The person who asked the question said thank you. And now we have another comment, and it says, kids' needs being met. Only a 2.4% overall budget increase in this era is impressive. The prospect of a healthy injection of funds being directed to the reserve fund is important, and a reduction in the tax rate for all member towns is a cherry on top. Tip of the hat to the administration and board for this exceptional work. Very good news all around. Thank you.
And to circle back to that question, Jamie is on and has corrected me. It's $2,100 for a teacher or someone who's in that category, and then $2,200 for somebody who's non-licensed for the HSA.
And I just want to interject and acknowledge that I appreciate, as I'm sure we all do, hearing that nice reflection, because this is a challenging time in which to be building these budgets. And in our effort to kind of attract and retain high quality staff, which is really so fundamental to the organization, that is obviously a big driver of our budget. And the equity work that we're doing right now too, seeing gaps such as that preschool situation in Sheldon, the need for more instructional coaches, the need for us to address some pretty intensive kind of social, emotional, and mental health needs. All of these factors kind of drive the budget, and we're always trying to thread that fine needle between kind of acknowledging the that we need a budget that our voters can get behind, and we also have a lot of needs to address within all our buildings. So I appreciate that reflection a lot from that one comment.
We also have a something else related to the HSA. It says the HSA is also a tax advantage for the employee.
Yes, it is. Both go to the employee pre-tax.
And right now, I don't have anything in the Q&A, but
I think I want to just add, I'm going to add something in here. So, I see some familiar names in our attendees, and you have been around and you have seen these communities come together under one merged district. And just my observations, having been the superintendent during this time, is the work that this board has done is incredibly admirable. We have evolved to a place where when board members are looking at budgets and when board members are looking at resources, they're really embracing that notion that all of our students are all of our students. And I don't hear individual town conversations in our board meetings. It's very much focused on what are the needs of all of our students. And so some of those pieces that Mary just pointed to when she made the statement about equity, this board is always looking through the lens of what do our students have access to, what opportunities do they have, what resources do they need, and really looking at how can we ensure that everyone has what they need and that we're creating equitable opportunities across the board. So just to kudos to the board, because this has been, we're 3 years in now, and it has been challenging work. And for those watching from the outside, I hope that you can see it too.
Thanks, Lynn. And I'd encourage, everyone who is on a social media platform, especially Facebook, when this is posted tomorrow, to share it in your respective communities. It'd be nice. I do think it's really helpful for people to kind of understand what runs in the background of these budgets, and not just show up on town meeting day and see an $18 million figure and not understand a lot of the kind of ins and outs of that budget. So hopefully this recording kind of can get disseminated in the next few days into the community, and people really understand when they vote. And we hope that they will support this budget and support the good work that's being done both in NMV and in the broader SU. These are really challenging times, and I think that this organization has done an exemplary job rising to the moment that we're in, and the future is really bright. So I appreciate everyone's tremendous efforts, and again, I hope this gets out into the community. And I also encourage anyone who has questions between now and voting day on Tuesday, don't hesitate to reach out to any one of us. I'm always happy to talk with people, as are other members of the board. So if you have questions that arise after you see this recording, don't hesitate to reach out. Courtney, any other questions before we sign off, or would anyone else like to add anything before we end our meeting?
Somebody wants to know how many students are in Bakersfield.
I can get that number in just a minute.
Rhoda, do you have that off the top of your head?
We're close to 140. It's not exactly 140, but it's close.
136 in Bakersfield.
Other than that, sorry, Lynn, I don't have any questions at the moment.
It might have grown a little or shrunk a little because what we reported on is from our October 1 enrollment number.
Oh, sure, of course.
Very similar to Montgomery's size.
The person said thank you for answering. I also have another comment. We have a great lineup of professionals. Are we meeting the needs of our school personnel and most of all of our children?
I think that I'll take a crack at that, and if anyone else wants to jump in, please do so. I think, oh, the question has gone, Courtney. How do I still see it?
Click on answered.
Okay.
On the answer tab.
All right, here we go.
Sorry.
I think that I'll be honest, I've always tried to approach the work with honesty and just being direct about our reality. We're coming out of a really trying 3-year period, and our school personnel has had sustained really challenging experiences through this pandemic. And I think that we're trying to support our school personnel the best we can in this moment. I think that they have done incredible work. And I think that they have done incredible work in support of our students. I think that's the most important piece. There are certainly resources that we've put into place to help support them as individuals. And in terms of meeting the needs of most of our children, I think that, we've had to take a step back and look at how do we define success in the 3rd school year of a pandemic where it's really had an impact on students' access to learning. So we haven't been able to measure in the traditional ways that we would be able to measure student success. I think that one of the ways in which we've really tried to look at this work and where our students are is looking at growth over time in our students and, looking at some of the qualitative data that we have in schools. And I think that we see some promising things happening in our schools, and we're definitely seeing growth. We're seeing that this is going to take several years for us to recover from, to accelerate that learning for all of our students. In terms of social emotional learning and mental health, we have seen significant increases in needs that have arisen in those areas. And we as a system have been trying to build our capacity within the organization to hold up those students and meet the challenges that they're presented with. So I think that we're in a time and a space where we don't have the as many resources available to us outside of our organization through mental health and other agencies. So we're doing the best we can to create those systems and structures to support our students. And the reality is there's intensive need. We'll continue to work really hard to meet all of our students where they're at. I hope that was helpful. Anyone want to add to that?
The person said, thanks for all you folks do. And we have another question. What do you think our benefits are from Act 46?
Mary, would you like me to take that one?
Sure, Lynn.
I think one of the things that has come as a result of Act 46 is the flexibility in terms of our use of resources across the system. And I think that the opportunities that we're able to share, the resources that we've been able to share have certainly been helpful. I think that in FNESU in general, we tend to try to, even though we're not a fully merged system, we try to look at our resources really flexibly across the organization. I think that there were, you know, when Act 46 was in the news, when everything was happening with the merger, there were a lot of people that were wanting to focus the benefits of the merger on cost savings. And I think that one of the things in FNESU, if you think about the chart that Morgan shared where it shows the education spending per pupil, I think that mergers in some of the districts that had really high per pupil spending, they saw some more substantial cost savings. We merged 4 systems that comparatively were pretty low in terms of their per pupil spending. So I don't think that the greatest benefit had to do with the cost savings as much as it had to do with the ability for us to work together more fluidly and collaboratively and share those resources in a way that can bring everybody up in that process. So in my mind, those are some of the greatest benefits that we've had as a result of Act 46.
And Lynn, I think I would also add that because of the merger and in our kind of emphasis on equity across the district, we provide in all of the schools now a lot of services and kind of instructional coaching and guidance. And we've upped our nursing staff levels in order to be equitable. And I think that's one of the positives too of the merger. That so while I think we in the old days kind of had a lot of pride in our low per pupil spending, but what I think got missed in that is what was missing within the building as far as the opportunities that we were providing our learners. And so in that kind of desire to have kind of equitable outcomes, but equitable resource allocation too within our buildings, I think merger has kind of, we've honed in on that and been able to add preschool where it was kind of not available, comparable to the other schools, nursing that wasn't comparable to the other schools, instructional coaches, and some of those benefits.
The other thing that it also gave us is greater stability in terms of budget, because what you see before you is a merged 4-town budget. And, you know, I served, for those of you who know me, and I know some of the people on here, I'm not sure about some of the others. I served for a long time in FNESU as a building principal in one of the NMV towns. I was a building principal in Berkshire for 11 years. And when you are a single district, the budget instability that can come as a result of being a tuitioning town can have really tremendous impacts on your spending plan from year to year. We had one year where I was a principal of Berkshire where we had 12 unexpected high school students show up after our budget had been approved. And that, so that you all know, in terms of impact at that time, it was, I think, close to $200,000 that we hadn't budgeted for. So that had a pretty significant impact on what we were able to do that year. We froze budgets by October, and you know, things that we had planned for and budgeted for, we just couldn't do. So what we're finding with having all 4 budgets, or all 4 towns with one budget, is you might have more tuition students in one town in one year, but it kind of levels off with the other schools. So the impact that's felt as those tuition students ebb and flow from one town to another, it kind of levels off because you have a more stable budget across the 4 towns.
We have another question. It's, were we able to do this by sharing these resources? Example, 1 nurse covers 2 schools.
We were at the start. That was our intention, to have 1 nurse covering 2 schools. And as you can imagine, as we got further into our pandemic response, we ended up not being able to manage having 1 nurse trying to cover 2 schools because there was so much need. It within each school every day. So we actually increased our nursing capacity so that we now have a nurse in each of our schools for full time. And that was a shift that we were able to make this year.
Any other questions, Courtney?
Not right now, no.
Okay. Well, we can wait a couple more minutes, and then if no further questions, then we'll sign off.
The next question is, will that be revisited if we get out of this mess? You're muted, Lynn.
It gets me every time, usually once per meeting. Board members, if you want to jump into this, it's fine. I think that it's something when we do a budget cycle, budget development process, we're always looking at staffing levels. So it wasn't something that we planned that would fall away post-COVID. But with every budget cycle, we always look at what are the staffing levels and what are the needs within each building. So any one of those positions would be up for conversation in the next budget development cycle, which will start next October.
And I will say, I mean, it's certainly possible that as we move out of the kind of pandemic response phase, it's possible that we would not need that level. But at the same time, there were, even prior to COVID, we were already kind of addressing the issue of being understaffed in the nursing capacity with kids with high medical needs. So those were conversations that, well, even in advance of the pandemic, we were identifying that possibility that we needed to up our nursing levels. So, you know, again, we reevaluate and we look into the staffing and these numbers really thoroughly every single year. So we'll just have to kind of see where we are next budget development, and hearing from our building leaders what they are feeling their needs are in their respective buildings always factors in as well.
Thank you, and thank you for your service is the response.
Appreciate that. You're so welcome. So it seems like we're coming to an end with our questions. And I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight and wish you all a good evening. And please do share this if you're on Facebook. Courtney, it'll be posted tomorrow on the FNESU page.
I will try my very best. We go through Northwest Access now.
Okay.
And they post everything on their YouTube pages, and then I share it. So
okay, great. Well, we'll keep an eye to that. No rush. It's plenty of time to get it out there. All right. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it so much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Take care.